Hello, I'm Dr. Chris.
And I'm Alan Chatney.
And this is the Source Points podcast, where we talk about all things geoscience, oil industry related, and anything that generally comes to mind, and sometimes even movies and entertainment. And it's been a while since we've actually sat down at this table to do a Source Points podcast.
It has been far too long since we sat down at this table. We've been incredibly busy the last, month?
Yeah, it's been,
How long
I
has it
think
been?
it's about 3 or 4 weeks.
That's embarrassing.
We should also mention that we have a special guest here.
Guest number 2.
It's number 2.
On Source Points podcast.
For his expertise in...
all things that go with geoscience and geoscience in trainingness.
That's right, yeah.
Philip Sokol.
That's right. Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate the ask to come on the podcast today.
Now, there's a reason why Philip's here with us today, as we have some fan mail.
Yeah, that's really good. We've had a couple of folks reach out from a couple of different universities, but among them the U of C and the University of Manitoba, so the University of Calgary, University of Manitoba, basically complimenting us on the one with John Hogue, where we sort of talked about the new role of geoscience and the kinds of things that students could be thinking about as they look at their career progressions through time. Yeah,
that would be the previous podcast 3, because we are on 4. This is the 4th.
Yeah, celebrating big milestones.
Milestone.
So why don't we dive in so that everyone can get to know Philip? We know him because we work with him. We're in the same office here at Explore. But
all right,
walk through and give us the Coles notes, Phil.
Yeah, you bet. So I guess fortunately enough for me, I've been able to stay employed, and I just celebrated 5 years, believe it or not, of employment after graduation. I graduated June 2012 and then started at Explore February 2013. Took over as a mat leave for a lady here at the firm in the role of a data manager. And it kind of progressed from there and took on more roles and responsibilities sort of on that geophysical side. Geophysicist in training is sort of my title here until I get that professional licensure. And we've just from sort of humble beginnings to designing some great surveys here at the shop. It's been an interesting ride for me. Something I didn't learn in school certainly, but I guess that's sort of the topic today. That's what we're getting into.
One of the things that I remember you telling me early on in your progression here, which was a time when you were sort of learning about data management, different data formats, data archiving, all these kind of nuts and bolts type of things, was that you felt a little bit frustrated that you hadn't seen that very practical side of things and from your time at university.
Yeah, I mean it's a totally different role, and there's so much that goes into sort of running sort of seismic operations on a larger scale that I didn't really appreciate. From loading seismic projects from the very beginning. We're talking basic information, source point information, to the SegWi stack volumes themselves. I mean, that was all done for us by our professors or by sort of the handlers of that data at the school. And so when I never saw that night, I remember some of my latest nights at the shop were get this loaded, Philip, and set it up so we can look at it on the screen. Something as simple as that. It took me forever. So I had a great appreciation for how much information is available, how much information I had to use, and how much information we can use, sort of with all of this.
Right.
Yeah, I think you had a similar set of experiences in the transition from academia to Chris, and getting a life of pursuing a PhD to here I am in a production setting.
Yeah, absolutely. When for me it was more of going from the transition from having, I think I've said this before, 6 deadlines a year to 6 deadlines a week. Yeah. And it's been great, actually, because it's opened my eyes to industry, which before was when you're in the ivory tower, industry just sort of happens off in the corner, whereas here it's like I see it every day, and which is eventually also something we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But
well, the interesting thing though is I think you got to give universities credit because they do give you the theoretical underpinnings that you need in order to be able to solve problems. Like, you didn't have a lot of great mentoring here. That's my fault, right? In terms of the highly technical stuff. So you had to sort of until let's say the last 2, 3, 4 years, it was a lot of external mentoring. But you were able to, through deduction and reasoning and some of the skills that you learn in school, sort of solve these problems.
Yeah, and school definitely teaches you time management. I mean, there's no one there holding your hand to get things done, and you have to hand things in on time, or you're going to fail. And no one really, we're talking about first year. I can recall going to class with, from high school. Say we had 30 kids in our class, and we go to a first year lecture hall for poli-sci 101 or whatever, and all of a sudden there are 450 kids in your class. The teacher doesn't care about you at all. You have to sort of make that initiative yourself. You have to go to lecture yourself. So, I mean, that carries through to work, certainly. But definitely the technical learnings and sort of that mentoring that I'll mention before. It wasn't there in the early stages for me, but we grew into it very nicely at the shop here, and I feel like I know a lot more. If you'd asked me this question where I'm at, I remember being asked that question when we were going through the APEGA. The APEGA is the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of Alberta, and I remember being asked when we brought on some of these early mentors, are you ready to be a professional? Are you ready for this? And I firmly said no. And I can remember being nervous and everyone saying, you're okay. You're going to be okay to do this. And 2 years later, absolutely, I feel ready. It's sort of a whole different change from that academic early days to today. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
That's neat.
Well, which sort of brings us to why Phil's here, and that had to do with the fact that we did get some fan mail. And we had talked about it in a meeting, and then that's when Phil chimed up and said, "Are you guys saying that a geoscience education isn't important?"
Well,
yeah.
and I think, wasn't there a tone of the engineering component, or there was somehow diminishing the geoscience bit?
Well, I just remember thinking, I appreciated the last podcast. I thought it was great. I remember meeting John many years ago and hearing him talk about this. He's all that outreach with the AAPG, the Association of, the American Association of,
we're trying to avoid acronymitis, but it's the American Association of Petroleum Geologists.
Yeah. Sorry, I just, I want to make sure everyone knows what we're talking on, and just hearing sort of that, the way we should be sort of studying things and moving into the world now as a new student would be to approach only the engineering side of things and those technical schools or those technical skill sets. And I've got a lot of friends actually right now that have been unemployed for a couple of years, let's say, a couple of years. And they're making that decision now. I mean, I'm talking just the other day, I heard of a classmate that's switching into healthcare, making that transition. So it's too bad because we could potentially be losing good geologists, good geophysicists that just didn't have that same opportunity they may have several years, or 2008 to 2012. So it's too bad.
Yeah, but I think I think the point that we were trying to make was that a diversity of skill sets. It's being able to connect the dots across a couple of disciplines. Like Chris has taken the initiative to go to GIS and go do that work to complement the PhD in geophysics and try to bring it to a more practical basis. And I think what you're saying is, okay, take the geoscience degree, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth. You'll tell me if this is what you're saying. But what I understand is take the geoscience degree and make it work directly. Just fly right into it, and then use your learning, use the theoretical basis, learn the practical applicability of what you've learned in school, and then drive it forward directly on a direct pathway.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities still out there for new grads, and I guess I'm coming from our firm where we've got some successes for new students coming into the workforce, and I've been successful here, so I'm coming maybe a little bit biased, but I don't have the same geology and geophysics is dead. Not that John said that at all. It's just, I don't regret picking geophysics at all, and I don't think engineering is the only answer. But I just hope going forward that potential for G&G in Calgary doesn't die with this group of exploitation over exploration kind of thing. I hope that there's still opportunity in 5 years, and we're not some bizarre niche subset of professionals in the world,
that's absolutely correct, because there's still, it's funny, my youngest son plays basketball with his high school basketball team, and I was watching with one of the other dads, watching our sons play here in a game, and I found out that he actually works at here in Calgary, at Nexon, on a non-operated play offshore South America.
Oh, neat.
Oh.
And so here's a guy he's a geophysicist, little did I know,
Mm-hmm.
and he's doing true big E exploration, albeit non-op through Nexon. He's doing big E exploration here in Calgary. And I think there's enough of that out there that as the industry begins to recover, this city of Calgary could be an absolute center of excellence for geoscience, whether it's exploration or exploitative or connected to engineering or near surface, or whether it's cross-disciplinary in terms of GIS connecting
But
the
given a
surface to the
choice,
subsurface.
But given a choice, would you, say, a first-year university student or a high school student came up to you and said, "Hey, should I go into geology, geophysics, geoscience?" What would your what would you say?
I can actually answer preemptive. So I'm heavily biased because I love geoscience.
Well, yes.
But I've already advised my youngest son that he ought to consider a career in geology. The thing about geology is it's incredibly diverse. And geophysics is no different, right? We know a geophysicist. We were just talking today, in fact, Phil, about a geophysicist who's an amazing guy, Paul Bowman.
Yeah.
And he's in Africa. He's with Geoscientists Without Borders. He's finding ruins. He's finding sources of water in sub-Saharan Africa.
Well,
and
that's all the cool stuff that not a lot of people get to do.
He's
right?
what we aspire to be when we're in undergrad. Yeah.
You think of archaeology, it's Indiana Jones.
Yeah, right.
Not some guy sitting there scraping off dirt on a bone.
Yeah, but there is. Even Indiana Jones would have to scrape dirt off a bone.
Oh yes,
and it's not all glorious, even for that renowned fictional archaeologist. Nor is it all glorious for the renowned geologist. I mean, some of these guys, Ray Price, who mapped a lot of the overthrust, the GSC with other colleagues, it was tough sledding, in the foothills back in the day. And so and I'm sure there's some stories from that period that were arduous and difficult, right?
Well, that the next question I would have for Phil would be the question I just asked Al, and that is, you don't have as many years behind you as Al does in geoscience. A new high school grad comes up to you and says, "Should I go into geoscience?" What would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, if I was faced with that question, that's a tough question to answer, but I think I would honestly say, I'd say I'm a bit of a risk taker on things like that. And I would say, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I don't think it's going to die. I think, there's a lot of stuff on the bleeding edge that's coming out that'll provide a lot of opportunities down the road. And I see all of a sudden a need for it in, 5-10 years, whatever it's going to be, a need for G&G, a need for that specialized attack on the subsurface that may or may not be there. So I would definitely advise, the up-and-coming undergraduate or the up-and-coming high school student entering university or college to consider it, certainly.
Plus, you have a generational turnover. This is the other thing.
Right.
You've got gaps in coverage from an age perspective that are going to be significant going forward. We just talked to one of our great clients, and she informed us today she'll be retiring here in June, and she's retiring young, and there's been a couple of those, and as people are arriving at the end of very successful careers, and they're saying, okay, I want to shift my lifestyle, I want to be paying attention to my grandkids and enjoying the life that I've sought out for myself. That's going to leave gaps for people to fill, and we're going to need to make sure that we've got the up-and-comers to take that on.
That's right, and not only that, we need to make sure we extract all that knowledge from those really highly competent individuals before they take off. I mean, that's I've been fortunate here to have been sort of given or blessed with, if you will, a really great mentor that's taught me a tremendous amount. I've been really fortunate on that, to have that one-on-one with one of the pioneers, I would say, in seismic at least.
But what's interesting too, Phil, is I know that you took 2 degrees.
That's right.
So you took geophysics. One of the things that I thought was great when you came aboard was, what was your second degree?
Yeah, I have an undergrad. I did a second degree in economics.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that
you always need another angle as well.
Keep it alive, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Keep an interest, broaden your interest.
But we're talking about this like there's going to be some sort of I guess, recovery in the future to be able to sustain these new students coming up from the ground up, which would sort of bring us to talking about how is it going to be sustainable in Alberta, and is that with this sort of pipeline debacle that seems to be unfolding at this month, whether or not it's going to continue in the
every
future.
day.
Yeah, it's tough. One thing that before we leave geoscience and on that transition is that to those who might be listening who are in university or who considering high school, considering entering this kind of stream, they can actually be the reason for a recovery. In other words, those new ideas coming in can actually be a big part of what drives it, right? I mean, doing the same thing over and over again may or may not be the right way. One of the things that we get challenged with here, because we've got a pretty diverse group of people, is we get challenged with the notion that we ought to do things differently, that we ought to reduce our impact on the environment, or we ought to, and those kinds of ideas and change and that kind of dynamism, I think, can help drive the recovery. Now, that's not going to solve the macro problem that you're talking about. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Phil.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, it's an interesting question you bring up, because it brings to me, last year we participated in an event that's coming up for us as well, Earth Sciences for Society, and we were posed with that question a lot with kids. Would you want to enter the geoscience sort of workforce and look at that as a viable career? And I told them I told them my answer, I think, all the time there. So I think as far as a recovery and sort of seeing the potential in people, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I've seen some really talented products get sort of developed here locally at our shop, just from, a lot of young, bright minds put together in the same place. We don't think the same. We've been taught a different approach for field acquisition, at least.
I think it's encouraging. From what I'm hearing, it's encouraging people to come up with ideas.
That's right.
Rather than just being a cog in a
you don't want to be put in the corner. You want to be sort of allowed to try something.
That is absolutely, I always fall back on this. I say I did work for a major corporation, and I was a cog, and it was absolutely the most horrible experience I've ever had. And if that was ever going to be my geophysics or geoscience experience again, I'd never want to do it.
But, some people like being in a cubicle, looking at a computer screen, picking horizons.
Oh, it's, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not just boring, it's...
Well, it's safe.
Predictable.
Predictable.
Yeah, you have a certainty of stability, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. The industry can offer that career in a stable, larger sort of multinational type setting. But obviously here we're...
I take a bit of a risk. You want your name associated with something great. Have a brand or sort of leave a legacy, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so pipelines. I mean, this thing just is like a slow-moving car accident. And I'm actually starting to believe.
We should probably give a little context of what's going on at 2018.
Yeah,
here.
Go ahead.
How to put in? The Trans Mountain, Kinder Morgan pipeline was
Trans Mountain.
Trans Mountain Kinder Morgan expansion was approved by the Canadian government, and I think it was it just a few weeks ago the BC government decided that they were going to attempt to put a kibosh on it by
passing legislation. They were attempting at that.
How about, let's put it this way, anti-Canada legislation to stop economic development.
This movie keeps on playing out. I mean, we the absolute slam dunk. Energy East. Kinder Morgan's Trans Mountain pipeline is actually the twinning of an existing pipeline. It's actually really fundamentally just, at its
going
core,
next
it's
door.
An increase in the throughput of an existing pipeline that's operated safely for decades. And we talk about, the U.S. media has been rife with the concept of foreign meddling in the American election. I think there's very little doubt that there was a significant element of foreign meddling in the U.S. election. Probably has been before, probably will be again. And I'm just as certain that the U.S. meddles in many other foreign elections themselves, including, whether it's government-sponsored or not, including the Canadian election, where there's, Vivian Krause has done some great work uncovering the money trail around foreign funding of NGOs that had targeted campaigns in sort of vulnerable ridings
Right.
in the last federal election, putting into power at both provincial and federal levels people who are internally blockading the production of oil and gas in Canada. And the unfortunate reality of that is, we're set to lose, I've seen different numbers, $15-20 billion in economic opportunity just on price alone this year. If you compare the price of Western Canadian Select to West Texas Intermediate, which is one of the things, by the way, that drives me crazy about the news. Every day, CBC, CTV, they put up the price of oil, West Texas Intermediate. It's not the right price.
Put a campaign to push the Canadian price.
I think they should show the differential. Today, Canada lost X. Today, Canada lost.
It gets pretty real
X.
then.
Well,
yeah, that's right.
Today, we lost this much tax dollars.
Well, it's disheartening when I see in the news. It's the lines they go with are X number of people are against a pipeline expansion, and it's not like that's not what the question is. The question should be, or part of the question is, do you support economic benefits to Canada? Who's going to say no to that?
Right, exactly.
Nobody's going to say no to that.
Phrasing of the question. And will you accept the risk? Because there is always a risk. Let's be honest. There is always a risk of spill. There's always a risk.
There's a risk for being alive on this planet to get your bananas into a winter atmosphere. For example.
So, but I mean, we've made some progress. I don't know what you guys' thoughts are on sort of the lifting of the wine ban and some progress there. Yeah. I guess for those that don't know, our premier, Rachel Notley, she imposed a tariff or a wine ban on BC wine being imported into Alberta. And I mean, she called it that they blinked. She said BC blinked. So I don't know what your guys' thoughts are on that, if that worked.
I don't know right or wrong. I mean, I guess I like BC wine, but I think it was a strong move by her. I got to give her some credit, and I don't do that lightly.
It was counterintuitive, perhaps.
But I've not been impressed with some of her hiring decisions. Sephora Berman and other pipeline opponents being admitted and given the keys to the castle. I don't think that's a good idea. But I did like the stance. I thought it was a bit of a savvy media move. I'm not sure it has the same economic impact to so I'm not sure it's a fully retaliatory measure.
Right.
But I did like
it could have been the first step in a multiple prong attack.
But I also liked the notion that it was something that caused pain unilaterally, without sort of, well, you're not going to get our oil, which sort of would punish us.
Yeah.
Right. And so I thought that was I thought there was some thought put into that. It'll be interesting to see what her task force does.
Right.
So she's got this 19 person task.
That's
force.
right. Yeah.
And that is going to be interesting.
Yeah, because she's got the sort of the follow up if BC sort of does anything, whatever back, they're ready to strike back in a way. So, and I can tell you, I grew up in Kelowna, and I heard from my folks that locally that hurt. The wine ban hurt them locally. That was big news for the Okanagan.
Right.
So I'm sure, Horgan and Weaver got an earful from folks from the community of the Okanagan, certainly.
Yeah, I think it was a savvy, and I mean, it's just a very, to me, it's the same sort of thing as when the mayor of Montreal is despite dumping millions of liters of raw sewage into the St. Lawrence, won't let Energy East get built to offset the Venezuelan and Saudi oil that's landing in Eastern Canada. It's absolutely absurd, and I think in that case, serious consideration ought to be given to not purchasing products from that particular province. I think the same goes that way.
Right. We will not take your...
This is not working, guys.
Yeah.
This is
maple syrup, no.
A country is supposed to work together. We're supposed to be on the same team here, and we can hold each other accountable. That's fine, right? If we're doing something untoward that's genuine. But when we're all working on a best efforts basis and we have outside influences shifting the course of elections and shifting outcomes for Indigenous communities and having all this weird influence that's really fundamentally advancing the cause of the Americans at our expense.
And we do like Americans.
It's time to wake up. It really is time to wake up. So we'll see where that goes. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how this unfolds.
Yeah, I mean, I know you've referred to it, Al, as sort of the death by 1,000 cuts, and that's sort of I fear that approach if it goes to court. If it's delayed and delayed and delayed, I don't want to see that kind of an approach, but that's the reality we face right now.
Well, we seem to be at the 25-minute mark, which is pretty good.
Holy smokes!
Time's flying.
Time's
guys.
flying. Well,
It's good to have a timekeeper because we'd be here for 3 hours.
That's
otherwise.
right.
So as my transition says, speaking of, this is where we talk about entertainment, or in the case of Al, some movies, probably more
We can
mostly
talk- I'm
Oscar.
wide open. I'm still obsessing on the Oscars. It's been, I don't know if you followed, how many Oscar movies have you guys seen? Like
they're on a
contenders for
list.
Big picture.
That's right. I'm trying to think of the list. The list is I've seen Dunkirk. Dunkirk's on
That's
the
a
list.
good movie. That's a great.
I haven't seen Get Out. That's on the big time watch list for me. I haven't seen it. And then I think I haven't seen the Winston Churchill. I haven't seen that. Darkest Hours. Yeah. I can't remember the rest of it. I just watched a meme video.
If you want to see the guy that's going to win Best Actor, you watch The Darkest Hour. Gary Oldman's incredible.
Yeah, he acts in a fat suit.
As I've said on here before, I managed to, in the same movie theater, I was there with both Jason Kenney, who's be contending for the leadership of our province in the next election, and 3 rows behind me, Stephen Harper, our former Canadian
That's
Prime Minister.
You need to get selfies
And-
next time. Selfie that up.
Well, they were
Go
it was-
fanboy.
It was Boxing Day, and they're certainly allowed to have their privacy.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But it was interesting watching another great conservative leader. But I've been taking note of The Shape of Water. Did you see this?
Oh yeah.
Amazing movie, very well done. Guillermo del Toro.
The
directed
visionary director Guillermo del Toro.
yes.
That's his contractual obligation.
Man, I got to get out
Yeah.
of my box.
But then it emerges in a lawsuit that may be frivolous or may not be, that there's a 1969 play about exactly the same subject, which is a nearly mute or a mute a janitorial worker who falls in love with a river creature.
Interesting.
So it's like, what? You
Okay.
can't-
So
what
and
do
this
you-
is being portrayed as an original film?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know
They
that.
didn't give
Oh,
any
so-
credit to this thing. It's like,
Oh,
river
no.
creature from 1969. What are you doing?
Okay.
So
Or maybe-
but I don't know. It's a lawsuit, so it hasn't been settled. It's you get to
In the
defend
courts,
yourself.
yeah.
Right.
But the other one that we were talking about the other day in one of our meetings, Black Panther.
Yeah, big buzz on that
What
one. Yeah.
would
But
that
it's not
win?
an Oscar. It's
Oh,
not
it's
an
not
Oscar.
an Oscar,
No.
no.
As far as I know, unless something.
No,
technical-
and it's.
I think it's a 2018.
That's right. It
release.
just came out. This is
Right,
we're
yeah.
talking last week.
Last
2 weeks
weekend,
ago.
yes.
15th.
There's been a huge buzz, and I have not seen it at all.
And my
But
15-year-old
both of you
son,
have.
my youngest son, who's 15, he was saying, "Dad, we got to go see Black Panther. All my basketball friends want it." I said, "Okay, let's go see it." And I'm not a big Marvel guy. I'm trying to watch the Oscar contenders, but I sort of, take one for the team. It was excellent.
Yeah,
actually.
it was a lot different than I go to the movies for those big Marvel contenders. That's what I like to see, and this was very different from that. Certainly, different than I expected, but it ended up being very entertaining. Absolutely.
As much hype as currently is it worth it?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah, I think it's a must watch. I mean, it's thought provoking in a way, right? I think that's the whole idea of this movie. But
Great cast. Great cast. In fact, the Get Out. Who's the actor from Get Out? Because he's in the movie.
Is he? I haven't seen Get Out yet. I haven't watched.
He's the
that.
rhino riding leader.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, that's right.
I
Yeah.
forget that guy, but anyway.
It'll come to.
So,
we gotta
but
have
Get Out, you
computers
got to
here,
see
yeah.
Get Out. It's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, we don't have any references. It's all.
No.
It's
gotta
all
be
gray
fast.
matter.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
If we do this for long enough, we'll eventually have a producer that'll look stuff up for us.
That's right.
Oh yeah, just sit there.
Through on the other side of the glass. and,
Yeah.
I do it right now, but if I do it, we will stop recording and then.
The Fabergé egg
Yeah, it
setup,
gets broken.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it is baling wire and chewing gum here.
No,
So-
it's a pretty good rig actually. The setup.
the setup, yeah, it's all right.
yeah, no, nice job. Chris.
So you've seen how many of the movies then for that?
So Best Picture, I'm missing Lady Bird. I haven't seen Lady Bird
Oh yeah,
yet.
okay.
Need to see that one.
That's indie. That's that indie film, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
indie film. Supporting actor, I got to see The Florida Project, to see Willem Dafoe in The Florida Project. And I've got to take in I, Tonya. My wife is very keen to see
Oh
I,
yeah,
Tonya.
that looks.
Yeah,
good.
my wife saw that too, or
we-
saw the advertisement and was like,
We
all those
remember
movies
that
are great.
time. Tanya Harding, Nancy Kerrigan, and the whole. It actually happened. It's totally crazy.
Yeah.
And then there's one other, Roman J. Israel Esquire, to see if Denzel can contend for Best Actor. There's a couple others. If you're only going to see one or two, definitely 3 Billboards in Ebbing, Missouri.
Yeah, I mean, I remember
Yeah.
you talking about that in the office here. That one looks pretty interesting. Yeah.
And they're all the thing with iTunes is like, you could save a lot of money on, if you can rent things on iTunes, if you have a decent TV, but they don't release them until the 27th of February in rental. So you're talking about
all the
most of
okay.
And some of them aren't even in the queue yet. Okay, so we're sitting here like today's the day when we start binging on the leftover
because you can't rent
rental because
it
I don't want to spend $22 to watch a movie in my house, or $27. So we're gonna rent them for like $6. But now we have to watch like 2 movies tonight after my son's basketball game.
Just binge
You
sessions.
It's coming up this Sunday.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
iTunes and iTunes and chill? Is that a thing?
I don't know.
You've not heard that? Is that a millennial
No, I'm
thing?
too old for that stuff.
So am I.
Oh, jeez. that makes me really old then.
Yeah.
I only ever watch stuff on Netflix just because with the kids I can't get out.
Honestly, Chris, you got to take your kids to Jumanji. If I can talk about
that
movie, was so
it
excellent.
says PG-13.
I mean, there were a couple.
I know. My kids saw it and they're like, oh, because I've showed them. We've watched Jumanji, the original, and Zathura, which you may or may not be. It's the sequel to Jumanji where they're playing a space game.
Oh, I've never heard of that.
Yeah,
but if you've shown them the original Jumanji, I mean, I always tell my friends, and we speak about it, and it's the colonel, the guy, the hunter.
Yeah.
Scared the hell out of me as a kid. And this remake was great. I thought they did a great job.
I'm almost certain it's PG-13 because my kids have requested it.
Maybe.
How old are your kids?
I have 864.
Do they have iPhones yet?
Okay.
No.
It's funny. My experience with my kids was with our oldest son, he had to break trail for my youngest.
Yeah.
So with my oldest son, it was sort of like, oh boy, PG-13, you're only 12 and a half. Next year you'll be able to go, right? And then for my youngest son, it's like restricted. Come on, let's go.
That's right. Yeah, the classic, the martyr of the first one, right?
And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's how it's been. But.
All right. Well, looks like we've hit at least the 30-minute mark. We could probably keep on going on about movies, but
that's going to be episode 5.
That'll be episode 5, and hopefully we'll get these out sooner than we did this one.
Trying to get back on track.
Well, I figure if I can do it, guys, everyone in the office should be able to step up.
Yeah, you're the busiest guy in the office, and you can
second busiest.
Yeah, you can definitely do it. So.
All right, so we're going to need our outro music as long as we're still connected to the Bluetooth.
If the technology works, we can
to the Bluetooth.
We can do this here.
Did I say Bluetooth? Bluetooth.
I don't know what's going on. Oh, here.
There we go.
All right. There's some outro music, guys. Some outro music.
Once again, this was the Source Points podcast, and I'm Dr. Chris.
I'm Alan Chatney.
And we'd like to thank our guest,
Philip Sokol. Appreciate it.
And until next time, keep rocking.